Today's video will be notebook page 52, and it will explain the 3 algebraic properties that we're going to be looking at. So right now I need you to turn to your table of contents, pause your video, and label pages 52 and 53. Pause your video and do that now. Now that you've labeled your table of contents, I would like for you to turn to your next 2 blank notebook pages. And the notebook page on the left should say, page 52 is the page number, the title is Properties, and the I can statement is I can identify algebraic properties. So if you will pause your video and label page 52. Now that you've labeled your notebook page, we're going to go through a few definitions and examples, and the purpose of this page is for you to be able to look at a math problem and just identify which property is being shown. The first property is the commutative property. Pause your video and copy down the vocabulary word commutative property and the definition that you see. Pause your video and do that now. So if you look at the word commutative, you'll see the base word commute. Commute means to go back and forth. Each day when you come to school, you commute back and forth to and from school. You come to school in the morning, you commute back home in the afternoon. So the commutative property has something to do with going back and forth between the numbers in the problem. Remember, commute means to go back and forth. Another way of explaining the commutative property is to say that the order of the numbers change, but the answer is going to stay the same. Think of it like this. When you commute back to and from school each day, let's say that to school you pass a McDonald's and then the First Baptist Church. So when you commute back home, you're going to see the First Baptist Church and then the McDonald's. So the order changes because you're going back and forth with the numbers. Before we look at 2 examples of problems showing the commutative property, I want you to make sure that you have the complete definition and the vocabulary word written on your notebook page now. If you will pause your video and copy down the 2 examples that you see on the board. These 2 examples show the commutative property. The first example, 4 times 5 equals 5 times 4, actually shows the commutative property of multiplication. And the second example, 12 plus 6 equals 6 plus 12, shows the commutative property of addition. The commutative property only works with addition and multiplication. It will not work with division or subtraction. So if you'll notice, all that's being done here, on the left of that problem, you see 4 times 5, and that is equal to, when the order is switched, it becomes 5 times 4. But if we were to solve this, we would still get the answer of 20. 4 times 5 is 20, and 5 times 4 is 20. So notice the only thing that has changed is the order. The numbers have been switched back and forth. For example 2, 12 plus 6 is being added, and when you switch those numbers back and forth, that is going to be equal to 6 plus 12. And that is simply the commutative property. The next property that I would like for you to write down is associative property. You're going to copy the vocabulary word and the full definition. Pause your video and copy that now. If you look at the word associative, there is a base word, associate. And I want you to think of it like this. You associate with your friends each day here at school. That means you group yourself with them. So if you will underline or circle the word group, that word is going to help you remember the associative property. Pause your video and circle the word group. So what the associative property says is that we can change the grouping of the numbers, but the answer is going to be the same. Pause your video and underline those key words. So if you'll remember, I associate with friends, so that means I group myself, and the associative property says I can change the grouping, but the answer is going to stay the same. Whereas the commutative property says I can change the order, and the answer is going to be the same. Let's look at how this looks with two problems. Pause your video and copy down both examples. The first video shows the associative property of multiplication, and the second example shows the associative property of addition. So we're going to study both of these problems carefully. On the left side, we see 4 times 5 times 7, and you notice that 5 and 7 are being grouped together because you see a set of parentheses grouping those numbers. On the other side of the equal sign, we still are multiplying 4 times 5 times 7, but this time the grouping changed. It was around the 5 and the 7, but now the parentheses have moved and the 4 and the 5 are grouped together. So that shows my grouping of the numbers changed, but my answer would be the same if I solved that problem. Remember, parentheses around operations of numbers shows grouping. Now let's look at the addition problem. On the left side, you will notice that 12 plus 4 is being grouped together. And on the right side, we're still adding 12 plus 4 plus 6, but the grouping changed, and it is now around the 4 plus 6. Study those examples carefully. Another thing to point out is in the commutative property, we don't see any parentheses that are grouping any numbers. However, in the associative property, we do see parentheses showing how the grouping has changed. The third property, I need you to pause your video and copy down distributive property and the full definition. Now this property we've actually used earlier in the school year when we were factoring out expressions, where we were using the GCF to factor out an addition problem. So you should already know that the word distribute, if you look at that base word distribute in the distributive property, that base word distribute means to give out. We've discussed this earlier. I distribute papers to you. That means I give out. Your mail carrier distributes the mail. They deliver it or give it out. So this property states that a number is distributed or given out to multiplication over addition. This one you should be able to recognize easily because, like I said, we did this earlier in the school year. If you will, pause your video and copy the example that you see on the board. Okay, I've taught you all year that when you see a number next to a parentheses with nothing between it, you should automatically recognize that this means to distribute. So as I taught you earlier, this means 5 times 6, which is what this first portion of our problem says, plus 5 times 8. Remember when I taught you the distributive property earlier, I taught you how to draw those arrows showing that I am distributing that number by multiplication over addition. Let's go back and compare the way this problem is written to one that shows the associative property. Now you'll see parentheses in both of those. We see parentheses here, but we also see it up there. Keep in mind though that the purpose of the parentheses here is to show the grouping of the numbers. We still have a 4 times 5 times 7 and a 4 times 5 times 7. You have those exact same three numbers on the left side and on the right side. The only thing that changed is how the numbers were grouped. However, for the distributive property, we don't see the same three numbers, 5, 6, and 8. We actually see 5, 6, 5, 8. And that is because you are multiplying 5 times 6 plus 5 times 8. So, make sure that all of this page of your notebook, page 52, is complete. You should have the definitions and the examples. Before you move on to your next task, which is going to be some vocabulary activities, before you move on to that, I really want you to study how these examples are written. Keep in mind that commute means to switch the order back and forth. Associate means to group, so the only thing that changes is the grouping of the numbers. The numbers 4, 5, 7, 4, 5, 7, 12, 4, 6, 12, 4, 6. The numbers are exactly the same. The only thing that changed was the grouping. And then finally, the distributive property is where it combines. That's another clue. Here, we have combined multiplication over addition. Whereas up here, we only had multiplication and only addition. Make sure that page 52 is complete. Now you're going to do a vocabulary assignment. You're going to do 3 things. I have posted these. They may be in a separate post in Google Classroom, but you're going to complete a video. You're going to do a vocabulary game, and then you're going to take the quiz. Make sure at the end of the quiz that you go back and you review your answers.